There are truths that can sit in front of you for years and never touch you. You can hear them. You can even agree with them. You can repeat them back with perfect logic, and still, nothing changes. Then one day, the same sentence lands differently. It doesn't sound new. It sounds personal. It feels as if it was waiting for you, not the other way around. That's because readiness is psychological, not chronological. It isn't about age. It isn't about intelligence. It isn't about how many books you've read or how many conversations you've had. It's about identity, about whether the structure you're living inside is flexible enough to absorb something that threatens it. There's a difference between hearing something and being changed by it. Hearing is cognitive. It passes through the surface. It registers as information. You can analyze it, compare it, accept or reject it politely. Being changed is different. Being changed means the idea reaches a place in you that is already cracked. It means something inside you recognizes it, not because it's convincing, but because it's familiar. The mind filters out ideas that threaten its structure. It has to. Identity is a stabilizing force. It organizes your world, your values, your reactions. If every idea were allowed to enter freely, you would feel unstable all the time. So the mind becomes selective. It lets in what confirms the current structure and blocks what destabilizes it. It doesn't do this maliciously. It does it protectively. That's why timing determines impact more than content. The same message can sound irrelevant one year and life-altering the next. The message didn't change. You did. Or more precisely, your identity softened enough to let it in. If something doesn't hit, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It might just be early. And this is where the ego's defense becomes visible. When you encounter an idea that destabilizes your current identity, the first reaction is rarely openness. It's often dismissal, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp. You might feel irritation or boredom, or a quick intellectual counterargument forming before the idea has fully landed. You might turn it into a joke, or label it naive, or call it exaggerated, anything that reduces its threat level. Sarcasm can be a shield. Skepticism can be a shield. Even indifference can be a shield. Not because you're incapable of depth, but because depth requires surrender. And surrender is not something the ego volunteers for easily. The mind protects its version of reality with impressive skill. It reframes, it rationalizes, it selectively hears. It says, "That's not about me." It says, "That doesn't apply here." It says, "I've already thought about that." It says, "That's too simple." All of these are subtle ways of maintaining structure. Discomfort is often mistaken for irrelevance. If an idea irritates you slightly, that irritation may not be about the idea itself. It may be about what it implies. It may be about the part of you that senses a crack forming. And cracks are destabilizing before they are liberating. If it irritates you, it might be closer to the truth than you think. But irritation alone doesn't create transformation. Emotional resonance only happens when you've lived something long enough to recognize it. Experience opens doors that logic can't. You can intellectually understand boundaries without ever having felt the cost of having none. You can intellectually understand burnout without having collapsed. You can intellectually understand self-worth without having outsourced yours repeatedly. But until experience carves space inside you, those concepts remain abstract. Pain creates receptivity in a way comfort rarely does. Not because pain is noble, because pain removes denial. When something stops working, when an identity collapses, when a strategy fails, the mind becomes less rigid. It becomes curious in self-defense. It looks for explanations not to win arguments, but to survive honestly. Certain lessons require collapse before comprehension. You might hear the same message for years. Slow down, set boundaries, stop performing, let go of control. It might bounce off you repeatedly. Then one day, after enough exhaustion, after enough failed repetition, the message lands. Not because the sentence improved, because your structure weakened. Understanding matures through lived consequences. It isn't that you weren't smart enough before. It's that you weren't cracked enough. You don't understand truth intellectually. You recognize it when you're ready. And readiness requires something uncomfortable. Identity softening. Insight doesn't enter where identity is too tight. When certainty is rigid, perception narrows. When you're deeply attached to being right, being strong, being composed, being in control, there is very little room for revelation. Revelation needs space. It needs humility. It needs the moment where you admit, even silently, maybe I don't know. Self-awareness expands when defensiveness drops, and defensiveness only drops when it stops feeling necessary. When your identity is constantly under threat, you protect it, you defend it, you argue for it internally and externally. But when identity begins dissolving, when life has already shown you its limits, you become less interested in defending and more interested in seeing. Humility isn't humiliation. It's permeability. It's the willingness to let something in without immediately reorganizing it to fit your current story. And growth requires a crack in certainty. Not total collapse necessarily. Just enough instability that the mind loosens its grip. Rigid identities block revelation not because they're evil, but because they're efficient. They streamline reality. They reduce ambiguity. They tell you who you are and what you believe so you don't have to question it daily. But the cost of efficiency is openness. And when life demands change, efficiency becomes limitation. That's why timing is personal. Some people resonate immediately, others don't feel anything. It isn't about depth, it isn't about worth. It's about where their structure is. It's about what has already cracked and what is still intact. It's about what they have lived, not what they have read. Comparing timelines is dangerous because it ignores psychological readiness. You can't rush yourself into resonance. You can't force insight by repeating it louder. You can't shame yourself into awakening. The unconscious has its own pacing. It absorbs slowly. It resists until resistance becomes more painful than change. Certain messages reappear later in life for this reason. They circle back when you're different. They land when the ground has shifted. They feel familiar, almost as if they were waiting patiently for you to become the kind of person who could hear them. If it doesn't hit now, it may return when it needs to. And there's a quiet test embedded in all of this. How you react reveals your stage. Curiosity and dismissal are psychological indicators. If you feel curious, even if you don't fully agree, something in you is open. If you feel immediate rejection, something in you may be protecting a structure that isn't ready to loosen. If you feel neutral, that neutrality might be genuine, or it might be a sophisticated form of defense. Protection doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks calm and detached. Challenging ideas act like mirrors. They don't just present content. They reflect your current configuration. The reaction you have, irritation, boredom, resonance, curiosity, defensiveness, says more about your readiness than the idea itself does. In that sense, even this message is a mirror. Not because it's special, but because everything destabilizing becomes reflective. Your reaction to it, whether it lands, irritates, or passes through, reveals the elasticity of your identity right now. And that's not a judgment, it's information. Because readiness is earned through collapse, transformation requires the breakdown of old certainty. It requires the moment where your previous explanations stop holding, where your previous identity stops protecting you from certain truths, where the discomfort of staying the same becomes stronger than the fear of becoming undefined. Discomfort creates receptivity. When everything works, you defend it. When something fails, you look closer. When the mask cracks, you become more willing to question. When collapse removes illusion, space appears. And in that space, ideas that once felt irrelevant can suddenly feel urgent. This isn't a moral ladder, it's a process. If this resonates, it's not because you're better. It's because something in you has already shifted. If it doesn't resonate, that's not failure. It may simply mean your structure is still intact. And intact structures are not mistakes. They serve a purpose. They protect until they can't. Trusting your timing means refusing to shame yourself for not feeling something yet. It means understanding that awareness can't be forced, that identity must soften organically, that collapse, when it comes, is not punishment, but preparation, and that every phase has its integrity, even the phase of dismissal. If this doesn't hit, you're not wrong. You're not behind. You're in process. And when the moment comes, when something in you finally cracks enough to let a truth through, you won't feel taught. You'll feel recognized. And here's something even more subtle. Readiness doesn't feel like readiness while you're in it. It feels like exhaustion. It feels like the end of an argument you've been having with yourself for years. It feels like running out of ways to defend your old position. It feels like the quiet realization that the explanations you used to rely on no longer comfort you. That's why collapse and comprehension are so closely linked. Collapse strips away the defenses that once made certain truths impossible to absorb. When the structure weakens, permeability increases. Before that, even the most accurate message can feel irrelevant. You might hear someone speak about surrender, alignment, boundaries, detachment, and it all sounds abstract. You nod, you intellectually agree, but nothing in you moves. Because movement requires friction, and friction requires contact with lived reality. Without lived friction, insight remains theory. That's why two people can listen to the same words and walk away with completely different reactions. One feels seen, the other feels nothing. The difference isn't intelligence, it's contact. One has already touched the consequence. The other is still buffered by structure. Pain is often what removes that buffer, not in a dramatic, tragic sense. Sometimes it's quiet disappointment. Sometimes it's repeated exhaustion. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of certainty. Eventually, something gives. And when it gives, the mind stops arguing long enough to listen. This is where humility quietly enters. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's realizing your previous certainty had limits. It's the softening of defensiveness. It's the willingness to say, maybe I was protecting something that no longer serves me. And once humility appears, perception widens almost automatically, because you're no longer guarding every entrance. Rigid identity narrows perception. Soft identity expands it. If you are still deeply invested in being right, being consistent, being the person you've always been, you will unconsciously filter out anything that threatens that narrative. Not because you're dishonest, because identity coherence feels like survival. When coherence cracks, the nervous system initially panics, but then, if you stay, something else becomes possible. You start seeing what you previously dismissed. Messages you once rolled your eyes at suddenly feel precise. Ideas that once sounded exaggerated now feel understated. Conversations that once felt irrelevant now feel uncomfortably accurate. And the most humbling part is realizing the content didn't change. You did. That realization can be sobering, because it forces you to see how much of your previous rejection wasn't about truth, it was about timing. You weren't wrong. You were unready. And unreadiness isn't stupidity. It's protection. Every identity defends its own continuity. When something challenges it, the ego reacts automatically, sometimes with intellectual superiority, sometimes with cynicism, sometimes with polite indifference, sometimes with outright irritation. But underneath all of those reactions is the same instinct: maintain structure. This is why irritation can be diagnostic. If something makes you unusually reactive, that reactivity may not be about the idea itself. It may be about what the idea destabilizes. The stronger the reaction, the closer it might be to something structural. Of course, not every irritation is truth, but some are invitations. And neutrality can also be revealing. True neutrality is open. Defensive neutrality is closed. One says, "I'll consider it." The other says, "It doesn't matter," with a subtle tightening underneath. You can feel the difference in your body if you pay attention. One feels spacious, the other feels guarded. That's the silent test embedded in every challenging message. How do you react? Curiosity suggests permeability. Dismissal suggests protection. Irritation suggests threat to structure. And resonance suggests readiness. None of these are moral rankings, they're stages. If something doesn't land for you right now, it doesn't mean you lack depth. It means your identity doesn't yet need that crack. And there is dignity in that. Structures don't collapse before they've served their function. They hold until they can't. They protect until protection becomes confinement. There is also danger in comparing your timing to someone else's. You might see someone resonate with an idea instantly and assume they're ahead, but you don't see their collapse. You don't see what they lost, what failed, what broke open inside them to make that resonance possible. Readiness is earned through friction. It's shaped by consequence. It's carved by moments where certainty no longer protects you. You cannot borrow someone else's breakdown. You cannot skip to insight without paying the cost of identity softening. And that's why forcing awakening rarely works. You can repeat affirmations. You can consume content. You can analyze yourself endlessly. But if the structure hasn't cracked, the insight will hover at the surface. It will sound wise but feel distant. You'll understand it in language, but not in your body. Real understanding feels embodied. It feels like recognition, not persuasion. It feels like something in you saying, "Yes, I've been here." Not because someone convinced you, but because your lived experience made space for it. This is why certain messages reappear later in life, not randomly. They circle back when your structure has shifted enough to receive them. They return when you're less defensive, when you're less invested in proving you're fine, when you're more willing to see what's uncomfortable. And sometimes, collapse is the prerequisite. Old certainty has to break before new perception stabilizes. The ego has to lose control before humility can enter. Discomfort has to reach a threshold before receptivity opens. And none of this can be rushed without recreating the old rigidity. So if this resonates, it's not because you're superior. It's because something in you has already softened. Something has already failed. Something has already cracked. And that crack is not weakness. It's permeability. And if this doesn't resonate, that's not a verdict either. It may simply mean your current structure is still intact, still serving you, still necessary. There is no shame in that. Every stage has its integrity. Every defense has its reason. Every identity has its season. Readiness is not a competition. It's not linear. It's not public. It's private and psychological. And when the moment comes, when something inside you finally yields, you won't experience it as being corrected. You'll experience it as being seen. Not because the message changed, but because you did. If this doesn't hit now, you're not behind. You're not resistant. You're not incapable. You're in process. And process has its own intelligence.